In a whirlwind first month in office for President Trump, a number of buyouts and staffing cuts have been put into effect. One of the agencies affected is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This week, the Office of Personnel Management asked the FBI for a list of probationary employees. They also want justifications for keeping anyone who's worked at the FBI for fewer than 2 years. The move has sparked fears that staff cuts are coming. And joining us now with more insight into the FBI is Katherine Schweit, a former FBI special agent. Katherine, great to be with you today. We appreciate it. First off, can you just give us, a range of the crimes and cases that the FBI investigates for those who may not know?
I think it's everything that you can think of and then probably more. So we're special agents, so we're responsible, and I'm a former agent, but responsible for any crimes that we're assigned. So when the Lindbergh baby was kidnapped, suddenly the FBI was responsible for kidnappings. When bank robberies got to be a big problem, suddenly the FBI was responsible for bank robberies. So it's a huge array of crimes, but not every crime. Local law enforcement their job is to enforce the peace. So they have kind of a broader jurisdiction within their jurisdiction, broader authority. But the FBI works everything from transnational, sex trafficking to drug cases to cyber infiltrations.
Yeah, Katherine, let me ask you this. What are the biggest concerns to national security if the FBI is hampered?
Well, I think hampered is a kind of a charged word. No offense intended. But I think the reality is that less people, less work gets done. And I think the biggest fear that I have as a former agent who worked, in a field office, I worked in the state of Wisconsin, for instance, is when the FBI doesn't have personnel to help, the burden falls on state and local tribal law enforcement because I worked a kidnapping case in my county, in Racine County, and in one of my counties, and we had a woman who was kidnapped who was she was in her 80s, and when the sheriff's office called, they said, what are we, come and help us. What can we do? We deployed 50 agents in there to get that woman back alive who was actually kidnapped. Law enforcement locally doesn't have that ability to expand.
Katherine, run out of time here, but I want to ask you this before I let you go. On Friday, a federal judge signed off on an agreement that forbids the public release of the list of FBI employees who worked on the January 6th probe. If you can talk to us a little bit more about that, and what's the danger if those names are released?
I worked counterterrorism and counterintelligence for the first 15 years of my career, and then I switched over when the Sandy Hook massacre happened, and I became the king of, unfortunately, the person who was responsible for mass shootings. When I worked national security matters as a single mother in Wisconsin with my 2 kids in their own home, I didn't want my name to be out anywhere because I was concerned that the terrorist organizations that I was working on would track me down and track my kids down and do harm to me. The domestic terrorism issue that we have in the United States, which is reflective of the January 6th event, those individuals who committed acts or who were convicted of committing acts, they live here in the United States. They're our neighbors. They have different political views than their other neighbors. That's great. But the risk of releasing the name of somebody whose job was to follow the Constitution and follow the orders, lawful orders by a judge, you run the risk of having people go after them in a way that is very dangerous, because whether it's conspiracy theory or mob thinking, we don't need that. And I think that our job is to protect all citizens, and that includes the agents and analysts who worked on these jobs.
Yeah. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that I would love for everybody to kind of take a step back and realize that FBI personnel are hired not for their pay, right? They're hired to help abide by the Constitution and protect our civil rights. And you want that, I want that, everybody wants that. So I think maybe a step back to say, these aren't some images up in Washington. These are human beings who are here trying to work with state and local tribal law enforcement officers to keep us all safe from threats in the United States and threats that come from outside of the United States.
Katherine, thank you so much for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.